Halloween is the time for spooky stories, so let me put you in the mood with one. Put yourself in this situation. You're 9 years old. You have to get up in the middle of the night to urinate. You've done your business and you're walking back to your bedroom. It's a clear night, and your bedroom is at the end of the hall. There are large, out-facing windows that have the bright moonlight shining through. The long branches and the trees outside cast long shadows, moving with the wind. You pass your parents' bedroom and a closet. You inch closer and closer to your room. The wind is making your home creak. The darkness obscures what lies in wait. You creep forward and stop by your brother's room. The door is slightly ajar. He never does that. You approach the door and peek in, and as you look into your brother's room, a burly hand grabs yours. With a whispered tone, you hear a voice. It's a deep voice that you're familiar with. It's your uncle. The moonlight illuminating half of his face, accentuating the roundness of his fat jowls. He looks as if he's been exercising. He tells you that he and your brother are just playing and that you should go back to sleep and not worry about what's happening. He promises to play with you tomorrow. He grins at you, but something about this grin stays with you. Something about it haunts you. You enter your room and close the door. You lay down and feel off. You close your eyes and... I made you feel uncomfortable, didn't I? World of Horror. Sometimes I put on my nightmare goggles and everything looks the same. Is a game made by a Polish dentist. Taking homage to the works of Jumanji Ito and Harry Potter and the Lovecraftian horror, World of Horror plays like a short-form tabletop RPG drawn in MS Paint. I've been playing this game on and off for several years, and it's released in early access, and while simple, it's a game that brings me a lot of joy. The game takes place in the fictional land of Persona 5. You are some random schmuck. You've known that there's otherworldly beings, otherworldly anomalies that roam the world. You get word that an eldritch god is awakening and threatening to destroy reality as you know it. As the world careens towards the end, you prepare for the inevitable. At the end of the town is a lighthouse, a mysterious lighthouse. It's been closed down for as long as you remember, but something calls to you. You know that whatever is calling the eldritch god is housed at the top of the lighthouse. Destroy it, and you might survive just another day. This game features the ability to customize your palette of 1 and 2-bit graphics, and as such, I'll be using random palettes in the playthroughs I record for this footage. Some are really good, some are pure cancer. World of Horror's gameplay boils down to simulating the daily life of a Japanese salaryman through the lens of tabletop RPG rules. A single playthrough can last about an hour, but the journey of getting there is the joy of the game. Like many roguelites, if at first you don't succeed, die again. To access the lighthouse, you need 5 keys. Each key is rewarded by taking a mystery. Each run randomizes which mystery you get. There's a set amount in the game, and it doesn't really involve investigation in the traditional sense, just as long as you come to a conclusion. You could ostensibly completely ignore every detail in the game and fuck up every skill check, only to somehow stumble your way into defeating some haunted entity in the process of killing you. Mysteries vary in terms of storytelling and events played out. Most go to the overworld and act open-ended in what you can investigate, while also highlighting a linear path you need to investigate to complete the mystery. Some others play out as special events. Spine-chilling Story of School Scissors is the tutorial mystery, but the game plays out in a small scale, almost visual novel style. While events do occur, all of it draws from school events and ends with a boss fight against the slit-mouthed woman. Once you pick a mystery, you'll start with a map of the town. The game points you to what you need to investigate, or you can investigate each location and use your turn. From there, an event will play out, tied to the location you investigated. Each event plays out either as a skill check or a fight. An example of an event is your uncle comes into your room and puts his hand on your thigh. Do you sit there uncomfortably, or do you run? You choose to sit there uncomfortably. You succeed in your charisma check. It turns out that your uncle was just concerned about your well-being and brought home some Taco Bell. He even bought some Baja Blast, plus 3 to reason. Questionable familial relationships aside, invisible dice are rolled that factor in your individual stats. Like many other video games of its kind, stats are broken down into strength, dexterity, perception, knowledge, charisma, and luck. These should be fairly self-explanatory, and frankly, don't really matter in the long run. For example, you enter the school kitchen. Even though it's abandoned and the lights are off, something is being cooked in a large pot. You don't like the smell of it. You look for a first aid kit. This is a knowledge check. You find the first aid kit next to the storage and pat yourself quickly. Or you can't find the first aid kit anywhere. Could it be moved to somewhere else? Some of the events are unintuitive. That should have been a perception check, based on you being able to find the first aid kit. Stats also influence the weapon you'll be using. Realistically speaking, there's a lot of weapons in the game, some heavy and strength focused, or some nimble, like the steak knife, the best melee weapon in the game. Like, wow, I have to fight this horribly mutated salaryman whose decrepit body has been taken over by tapeworms. I guess I should cut him up with my steak knife. This otherworldly creature terrorizing and stealing the life force from people through their dreams, their forms incomprehensible as the creature you're fighting is nothing but a finger of a greater being. Just shank that shit until you've made mincemeat of it. Bloodborne has nothing on the weapon of mass destruction that is the steak knife. That being said, there's a lot of monsters that you'll be encountering. My advice, get a gun. And if that don't work, get a bigger gun. It turns out that 12 gauge is pretty effective against most humanoid targets. You have 3 different health bars in this game, stamina being your physical body. Take too much damage and you'll collapse under the stress of the eldritch horror of being overworked in Japanese society. Stamina is dictated by physical damage. Being bitten, stabbed, slashed, or shot does stamina damage. One of the consequences of failing your skill checks is losing stamina, though sometimes the reason for losing health is quite silly. You feel as if you're going mad, so you decide to visit an old family friend. Hey kiddo, could you lend me a hand? You lift the heaviest box. When you fail to do so, you crack your back. You feel demoralized. -3 stamina. Reason is your mental health, in the same vein that finding someone who's interested in the conjoined diaper hyperpregnancy foot fetish doujinshi, reason is the damage you take when something beyond your comprehension appears before you. Some otherworldly beings you encounter will violate your mind, probably filling your mind with the imagery and stank of an immobile, overweight woman's fetid taint. Now, I'm sure listening and watching my videos causes reason damage alone. Better pop some more Wellbutrin and risperidone to treat your depression and schizophrenia. The last health bar is Doom. Doom is your playthrough timer. If it reaches 100%, the old god returns and the world is doomed. While it's not directly related to your physical health, you have 5 mysteries to solve and a lighthouse to scale. Chop chop, the world's about to become a whole lot more depressing once Armageddon begins. And also, when you get the chance, turn on Last Stand mode. This changes it so that you die at -5 reason or stamina instead of outright dying, or if you have 0 or less reason or stamina at the start of your next encounter, it makes the game slightly more forgiving for newer players. Combat is turn-based and works on a sort of timer. You have a certain amount of time per turn where you can do something. You can start clapping rhythmically, or you can even prostrate yourself to beg for forgiveness. Effectiveness may vary, but more on that later. In a given turn, you can attack multiple times, the chance of hitting being a dice roll. Of course, if you have no weapon, you can always just kick your opponents to death, or find an improvised weapon. Enemies can fight you dealing either stamina, reason, or doom as damage. You can cram as many attacks as your weapon and character allows, but you run the risk of missing. Do you run the risk of missing and dealing an inconsistent amount of damage, or do you prepare your attack, confirming that your next will strike but deal less total damage per turn? With your total health being so low, you run a lot of risk and reward. How much damage or doom can you sustain in order to survive to see the end? Magic can be casted in battle or in the overworld at any time. Some are offensive, some are defensive, some support. Each and every spell has consequences. Midasu Touch, for example, costs some stamina damage in exchange for providing you some additional funds. Your tooth turns to gold, so you rip it off. Additionally, some other spells like Grow Teeth costs 2 stamina, but gives you the ability to bite your opponents. There are some wacky spells in the game, often with a heavy cost for reason. Skin removal flays your opponents, dealing massive damage at the expense of 3 reason. And while magic can be very powerful, you're calculating each and every cast. Enemies can also potentially injure you or curse you. Some can be treated, others, modern medicine can't heal you. A slit mouth detracts 1 charisma and strength from you, while a torn muscle prevents you from doing your normal amount of damage. But look, you can't stop. It's the end of the world, and it needs to be prevented. You might be coughing up blood, you got some fractured ribs, a broken jaw, and holes growing on your body, but hey, you're still alive. You're still kicking. Most injuries can be fixed by visiting the hospital. But, hey, look, this isn't a charity, and I'm an American. You better do your part and help out small companies like Big Pharma pay for their ever-expanding sphere of influence on the government. Curses, on the other end, are either psychological or supernatural in nature. Being branded raises doom with each investigation. Hallucinating and hungering for your fellow man reduces your perception and charisma respectively. Curses cannot be cured. Brain damage is a great example. I don't know how to tell you this, but you were retarded your whole life. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But your parents actively fed you fluoride and trans fats your entire childhood. It was never your fault. But your inability to succeed in life can be traced back to your parents. Anyway, occasionally you'll fight a ghastly otherworldly entity. Turns out that sometimes bullets and blunt force can't do much in the way of fighting ghosts. Clapping and prostrating yourself is a mechanic that applies to all ghostly enemies that lasts the entire run. However, this is a mechanic that requires some idea of trial and error. 5 ritual actions enable you to potentially banish ghost enemies. If you're happy and you know it, the game will give you a clue and you'll have to process this via trial and error to guess the correct combination. In truth, because this is random every playthrough, I never actually think this is worth it unless the game tells you that all 4 or all of your moves are correct. Running away and continuing your story is always more important. Though, I do think that the prospect of a Zoomer exorcist sometime in the future is kind of hilarious. They probably Fortnite default dance to perform a seance or floss to exorcise a ghost. Regardless, running away itself costs doom. But this is a small action of why I think World of Horror is engaging. Everything has some form of risk, and the game boils down to your risk assessment. As I've stated before, it doesn't actually matter if you manage to solve the mystery. As long as you live and come to the conclusion, you're fine. For example, during one playthrough, I was a star teenage idol, the heart and mind of everyone in Japan with a liking for the occult. I was visiting a friend of mine who had gotten into an accident, but it's strange, I wasn't very close with this friend. As I visited this hospital, I rizzed one of the nurses. I found my friend covered in bandages. I just sat around and eventually wandered the halls as I awaited the recovery. I was attacked by an anatomy model possessed by a ghost. With a swollen joint, I was unable to run. After severing its ties with the world and exploring more, I had met a man who was willing to treat my injuries. I was suffering from frostbite and a swollen joint, and my Menhera was hallucinating my friends. I had forgotten to take my medication. The kind man had told me I could get treated for free. Instead, I pricked at my swollen joint with a needle. It fucking hurt. As the days continued, I was approached by my friend's mom. She'd wanted me to deliver a package. I was a little skeptical, so I actually didn't. I tossed it away because I wasn't about to get caught dealing black tar heroin in the local hospital. Regardless, my friend managed to wake up, but they seemed strange. As I stepped up to walk away, they managed to tell me, "Did you know you're beautiful? Don't go yet. My final day of surgery is tomorrow. I can't wait to show you." The bed, the following night, is empty, but I hear footsteps. "You like what I did with my face? I've always admired you, you know, even when you acted like you didn't know me at all. I think the result is perfect. Too perfect." In front of me was a grafted together patient, someone who looks like me, someone trying to take my face. With my steak knife, I shank her dead. Once I stab her enough times, I bash her fucking head into a bloody pulp. As other patients begin to enter the hallways, other bandaged heads begin to give me the impression many others are attempting to look like me. I walk away from the hospital, traumatized for the worse. And that's awesome. How you string together the context of World of Horror is what makes it great. Now that you understand the basics of World of Horror's gameplay loop, you have to choose a character and an old god. World of Horror currently has 12 playable characters. They act as your main classes. Since you just start with 6, I'll explain those. They don't really differentiate from each other too much at the base level, but different stats and different starting equipment helps each character carve a specific niche. Some of the unlockable characters tend to be more interesting. Each character comes with their own exclusive perks, giving each other enough room to be unique. Kiri Minami is your resident nerd, specializing in intelligence as her primary stat. She starts with a random spell, and her perks focus on either increasing her repertoire of magic spells and other spell-focused bonuses. Aiko Takahashi is the most beginner-friendly character, focusing on high dexterity due to her swim club background. Aiko is the embodiment of dex is greater than sex, being one of the fastest and safest characters due to her perks. Her biggest detriment is a lack of knowledge, but, like, who gives a shit about being smart when you can just shiv every being you come across with a used steak knife like the average London citizen? Plus, she kinda looks like me, so I'm gonna go out and say that she's goated. Haru is your stand-in for the Yakuza character. After robbing a mansion, the man's friends are brutally killed, and he's forced to act to survive. Haru is strong, but he's incredibly dependent on cigarettes. It turns out that the greatest strength in life to function is a nicotine addiction. I'm not kidding, nicotine withdrawal is a permanent status effect that you can counteract with this starting pack of Lucky Strikes. Each pack produces 11 to 13 cigarettes and applies a temporary buff given that you have cigarettes in your inventory. Being a member of the Yakuza also gives him benefits through his perks, enabling better shopping options for more unique weapons and items. Of the vanilla characters, he's definitely the most unique character of the bunch, but definitely the hardest to play. His reliance on cigarettes gets expensive the longer your playthrough lasts. Mizuki Hamasaki is everyone's famous occult idol. The love of horny, fat, ugly Oji-sans around Japan is her greatest strength. Unfortunately, this actually doesn't translate well to any other skill, and she begins each playthrough with fairly mediocre stats. Mizuki starts with a random ally. Allies aren't playable characters, but rather additional stat buffs you can retain throughout the playthrough. Events or attending the school can provide you with characters that join the party, providing either +1 or -1 to a single stat. Mizuki's entire survivability revolves around having party members, some form of hostage situation to keep her alive. Fame is a perk that allows her to fight much faster based on the number of allies she's retained. Just like real life, there's nothing wrong with threatening people to join your side or cause. A cult, for example, is just another word for a group of like-minded people coming together to worship something. You could even call it a family. And honestly, if said people aren't there to worship you, is it really worth being friends? In fact, you as the viewer should be worshiping me. As the disembodied voice of an anime Fudanari with blue hair, I implore you to continue watching my worthless content and watch my silly streams. My script had a smiley face after that last paragraph, and I'm not sure how to vocalize that. Koji Tagawa is a photographer who's intent on trying to expose government secrets. He starts with a camera and focuses on perception. His camera provides him with additional knowledge, and he retains a fairly high spread of stats across the board. Unfortunately, there's not much else unique to his character. And lastly, Mimi, who, as I'm writing this, I've discovered is an unlockable character rather than a base one. Regardless, Mimi is a medical student and excels in her knowledge rather than her dexterity. She begins with 80% of the reason that other characters have due to her inherent paranoia. She's gaslit herself and is girl-bossing the rest of the playthrough. Her general perks are unique, but nothing to write home about. She starts with a scalpel that scales off of knowledge. It's not very good. You unlock more unique characters as time goes on, and I think the game's most interesting ones are locked behind achievements. With your character in tow, you now have to choose an old god. Each old god will follow the same doom path of 0 to 100%, but each old god has a modifier that changes how you play the game. The game begins with 4 general old gods. Ithatu, the devouring flame, was the supposed cause of the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, a pure, black marbled statue. It's implied that it's a being of pure flame. Dare I even say Kino? Ithatu, as your old god, is defined by entropy. Both you and every enemy does double the damage. While that doesn't sound so bad, small numbers add up. If an enemy does 3 damage normally, that means you're going to be taking 6 per turn. That's death in 3 turns if you're playing on the normal difficulty. Goizo, the thing forsaken by God, is a tentacled entity banished into the mirror dimension by an advanced race of humanoid reptiles. Goizo stalks its prey through mirrors and watches you through your every move. Resting, which is an action that's safe in the early game, allows you to recover stamina and reason at the expense of a small amount of doom is much more costly. Being a lazy, unproductive, slothful, deadbeat piece of shit will end the world sooner. Kuthak Atarasu, the spider god, is what happens when people find the spider monster girl attractive. It awakens from slumber, and once it's unleashed into the world, humanity will be bound in its cocoon and devoured. Pantes has put out statistical data that Vorfiends are obsessed with this old god, and are researching ways to summon this old god in real life. Kuthak Atarasu prevents running from battle, which means that if you're in a losing battle, you're fucked. Ath-Yolus, the towering god, is the last of the default old gods, a bloated, drifting eye of the cosmos that is slowly approaching your world. It's a giant ball. Ath-Yolus will inevitably consume the world. Its influence causes doom to raise whatever spells are cast, making magic a massive risk. Of course, you can just randomize the game and play however you want, but there are options. And I think it's fun to immerse yourself in a wildly insane story about whatever old god you get stuck with. Presentation. World of Horror is unironically one of the coolest looking games I've ever played. Its main inspiration stemmed from Junji Ito's work, and the striking 1 or 2-bit visuals help produce a level of uneasiness from its imagery. I love it. There's always a small detail that you miss the first time around, and then once you come back to it, you really appreciate the detail that's gone into the sprite work. The music is also really fucking good too. It's all chiptune, but it feels complex, and if it weren't in chiptune format, some of these would be really neat to listen to. Anything outside of the cases, such as the item shop, the new game theme, gets you pretty excited. It's upbeat and feels noticeably different from the rest of the game's atmosphere. While the actual investigation tracks have a certain weight to it, this really feels bizarre to say, but there's a crunch to the game's sound font that helps make it feel impactful. Each investigation track also has its own combat version too. It's got more of an upbeat tempo while retaining the weight of the original investigation track. There's a sense of tension behind the combat. Criticism. My biggest issue with World of Horror is that once you play the game enough, you've exhausted the game's options of surprising you. While I don't particularly think that's bad, because the random elements of the game help enable an open form of storytelling unique to World of Horror, this creates a sense of metagaming in order to play the game optimally. When you frequent events long enough, you know which choice leads to which choice, which unfortunately creates this loop of not paying attention to what your characters are doing and instead focusing on playing as optimally as possible. Eventually, the reason for why you choose certain options follows the logic of A. Do I ignore the hot stove, or B. intentionally put my hand on the hot stove? And I think that removes much of the charm and enjoyment of World of Horror. Other than that, I think reworking some of the base characters makes for a more exciting game. After a while, I actively avoided playing as Koji because I never enjoyed playing with him. My last criticism is that the game is too RNG dependent, and while that's fairly natural for roguelites, many choices are simply coin flips. Shops and perks on level up is a crapshoot. Some characters, like Haru, are entirely dependent on cigarettes. If you fail to get cigarettes 2, 3, even 4 times, that's upwards of 12 doom, which is incredibly punishing. Compare this to Enter the Gungeon or Binding of Isaac, action roguelites that, while randomized, still can be beaten given the individual skill of the player. Assessing risk and probability is a massive part of World of Horror. Sometimes consequences and damage, whether doom or health, is completely unavoidable, even more brutal if you're playing on Harbinger of Doom. The comparison to the other two games is unfair, as this is a completely different genre of game, but it's less of a criticism of the rules itself and rather the design of the genre. I do believe that World of Horror is somewhat flawed, and in all honesty, it's not much of a horror game itself, and more of a board game you can play by yourself. But something in my autistic brain really enjoys World of Horror regardless. The game's imagery and freeform storytelling still gives me hours of entertainment whenever I play it. I hope that someday, this game does inevitably have twice or even triple the amount of content that it does, because it's genuinely wonderful. I think it's the greatest translation of a short and engaging traditional RPG to video game I've ever seen. Even after unlocking every event in the game, you can easily remember most optimal paths in the game, which definitely puts a bit of a damper on the experience. I still recommend World of Horror. I generally think there's a very enjoyable experience in what you pay for. It's about $20 on Steam, and you'd be supporting a Polish dentist. I'd also recommend waiting until the game goes on sale. I'm pretty happy with what I have though. That being said, the review is now over. Happy Halloween. If you've watched this far, thank you very so much for watching. There'll be more content to come. I'm sorry for taking so long with this one. I've been very busy with finding a new job and taking care of a lot of personal issues. You can find me on Twitter and Twitch, where I play all sorts of retro games, cook, and I talk about guns. Please follow me on my socials, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and as always, get the fuck off my roof.